There we go. Hi, Zack.
First of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. I especially want to thank Eric Miranda for putting this together, sort of spearheading it, and I also want to wish him a very happy birthday. I'm not sure how young he is, but he looks pretty young to me. So I had prepared some visuals that was going to help everyone here, and I know that under the circumstances that's not possible due to time. And so as I look out amongst the crowd and see you closing your eyes, I will trust that you are visualizing what I'm talking about and not dozing off at this very thrilling subject. Water. You may wonder why I'm talking about water. First of all, the reason I picked it was because I'm really passionate about it. It's something that I've been studying on my own for several years because I see a great deal of potential in water as a molecule for our society in multiple ways. As I try to teach you something about water, I don't expect everyone to understand everything that I'm talking about. First, I would like you guys to be entertained by the speech. Next, I would like you guys to sort of have your minds open about what is possible, questioning the status quo, not allowing science to become dogma. And the third thing I'd like you guys to do with my speech is pique curiosity about questioning how you conduct yourself and constantly wondering what you can do different, think different, act different. Everything needs to constantly adapt, because when it does not adapt, things can go very badly as far as a lack of progress. So, anomalous properties of water. Water is one of the only molecules known on the planet Earth that floats in itself. If you think about it, water's density, H2O's density is less in a solid form than a liquid form. That provides a great deal of processes on planet Earth, one being ice floats. If ice sunk, it would sink to a spot in the ocean that was very cold, and it would create a positive feedback loop and create more ice. By virtue of the fact that it floats, it allows it to melt and create this great cycle that we know as far as evaporation, rain, runoff, and subsequent evaporation to complete the cycle. Water actually has a very peculiar phase relationship. It does not freeze or boil at the temperatures that you would otherwise guess based on its molecular weight and its atomic makeup. That is very peculiar because as you go down the periodic table and find related molecules that are composed of very similar elements, they behave much differently. Water also, in an anomalous way, actually, as you compress the molecules, you would think that they would get closer together like every other molecule or substance on the planet due to the excess pressure. The molecules will actually spread apart. And they think that this is due to the covalent bond and the vibratory resonance of the covalent bond between the hydrogen and oxygen itself. You may now start to wonder why this is important to us. I think that it is vital that we understand water better than we do today, because our planet is changing very rapidly. Ice is melting. The glacier that supplies 2 billion people in Asia is probably going to dry up by all accounts and estimates before the end of the century. That's a very frightening statistic. So what we need to do is, as a society, is take on the responsibility of finding better ways to sequester fresh drinking water from salt water. That typically is a very expensive process because it takes a lot of energy. That being said, water is the most abundant source of hydrogen on the planet. So not only is it important for us to drink, it also has a huge potential as far as an energy source. Because as everyone knows, hydrogen is what is broken off of hydrocarbons to create energy when you burn fossil fuels. The issue with water, both for sequestering drinking water and splitting the water molecule to sequester the hydrogen itself, is that water is very stable. It's a very happy molecule. which means you generally have to put more energy into it to get the hydrogen from the oxygen than you do when you recombine it as an energy source. And so what I have done over the last couple of years is I've undertaken the great, tedious, frustrating task of trying to come up with a more efficient way to split water. Historically, what you do to split water is you submerge 2 plates and you run electricity through those plates. And what happens is there's a redox reaction. The hydrogen is pulled away from the oxygen, the covalent bond is overcome, and bubbles arise from your water cell. They sequester the hydrogen from water by setting voltage at a specific level and pumping as much current through the water as possible. What makes electrical work in electrical energy is when you combine voltage and amps. That's something that Eric probably knows a lot about, being that he has a background in music and all of that industry. So what I propose doing is, because current is known to be electrons, waste, heat, instead of using the electron component of electrical energy, current, to split water, I proposed choking off as much current as possible and using voltage and frequency to agitate the water molecule and basically make it fall apart. We know from other experiments that though voltage is thought to be potential, it can still perform work. So those of you with little background in electrical energy, you can think of electricity as a river. So voltage would be how steep the hill is that the water is running down, and current is the amount of water that's running down the hill. Does that make sense to everyone? So you would think at first blush that voltage by itself could not perform work, but we know that it does. And we know that when you pulse water at a very specific frequency, there's something that is called resonance that occurs. And the resonance is something that's all around us, and it's very peculiar, and it's stumped many physicists, because what it allows you to do is input energy at the right time and create a very efficient system. You have very little wasted energy when you achieve resonance. An example of this is, I know everyone's seen the old clips of the bridge in California that sustained a very steady wind for 12 hours time and all of a sudden started rocking. Does anyone know the name of that bridge? I can't.
Calvin Gertie.
Is that the bridge?
Yeah.
And all the cars were rocking back and forth on it? That's a perfect example of, that wind was about 15 miles an hour, but it needed to be exactly 15 miles an hour, and it needed to be sustained for a certain amount of time to create that resonant effect. That's the same thing I'm doing with water. I'm not putting direct current through, I'm pulsing it. And I'm doing so because I've constructed, or I'm doing so by the fact I've constructed both a water cell and what they call a pulse width modulator. I had great visuals for these, but I'm going to need you to close your eyes and picture them. All it is a couple of timer chips, some knobs to allow me to control frequency, and some knobs to allow me to control how long that frequency pulse is sustained for by the water. There's an effect called electron spin resonance, and I know that that is also very confusing to most people, but what this system is essentially doing is, by choking off all the current possible, the only electrons available are the ones in the water molecule. And if you're starving this circuit and ramping up voltage super high, there's only one source for current, electrons, and that is the water itself. So rather than creating a redox reaction, a typical electrolysis reaction, what I'm doing is I'm essentially tearing away every electron that is involved in the bonding process between hydrogen and oxygen. At this point, you're probably, aside from being very confused, bored, and tired, you're probably wondering, how is this not already known? How has this not been explored? How has this not been discovered? Where did we go wrong? What did we miss? I propose, and I am not the first to propose this, is that there's a slight flaw in the electrical engineering model. And how that happened was, the electrical engineering model didn't really try to discover what electricity was. What it did was, it was set up to manipulate electricity to do functional work. It wasn't like physics in that it's trying to find great truths. It was a utility. And what happened was a guy by the name of James Clerk Maxwell, a very brilliant Englishman, modeled the electromagnetic field. And he came up with 20 equations and 20 unknowns. And essentially those 20 equations and 20 unknowns were resymmetrized, bastardized, and simplified into 4 equations and 4 unknowns. And it doesn't take a mathematician to know that 20 equations and 20 unknowns describes a whole lot more than 4 equations and 4 unknowns. And so what you lost was the ability to re-gauge a circuit, make it asymmetrical, and allow for the ever elusive magnetic monopole, which means that you can actually have an energy source from an electromagnetic field. That is what happened, and the reason that it has not been corrected is because, like I said from the beginning of my speech, science has became dogma. These people were trained in in the current conventional electrical engineering model. These great minds have now closed themselves off to anything new, any radical thinking, anything that would actually completely turn Maxwell's 4 equations on their head. And that's where we went wrong. And because of that, what we're left with is a closed loop, a circuit that will always consume more energy than it puts off. And that is not completely necessary. And what they do is they cloak that mistake in the notion of Newton's laws of thermodynamics that there is no energy created or destroyed. And I know we're all familiar with that from high school. What I propose, how are we doing?
Good.
All right. What I propose is that everyone tries to learn a little more about water, and you will all see that just like many other things, things were missed, things that people did not want to change, and people did not want to improve the status quo. And that's why water is relevant to everyone here at Empire, who is constantly